Welcome back to the program. Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg and the Labor MP Kelvin Thomson are with me this afternoon on the program. I mentioned the polls at the start of the show. We saw that Tony Abbott's now just 3 points behind Julia Gillard when it comes to who is the preferred Prime Minister. Labor's primary vote down to 31%. That's a pretty awful figure, Kelvin. It's almost a year since Kevin Rudd was knifed. When you look at these sort of polls, do you think, was it all worth it?
Well, certainly the decision that we took at the time was based on, I think, some serious considerations, and I think it was the right decision.
And the polls are one of those considerations.
It was the right decision to take. We were looking at our electoral prospects at the time in the run-up to the election. The point now is that an election is a very long time away, and it is our responsibility to win back support and win back voters over the next year or two.
Does it make Labor MPs, backbenchers, perhaps with seats with tiny margins, pretty nervous, though, about their fate and nervous about how the carbon tax is playing out?
I think our obligation is not to worry about our own particular circumstances, but it's to try and do the right thing by the nation. And the truth is that tackling climate change is something which has been around for 10 years, 15 years. Really, a lot more should have been done than has been done, and it's our obligation to get something done. And this is an issue which will go on beyond the next election and no doubt elections after that.
We know, Josh, that probably spirits are up in the coalition after these poll results today, but as Kelvin points out, you've got a long way to go until the election, probably a couple of years. Can Tony Abbott keep this up, do you think, especially if the carbon tax is introduced and the sky doesn't fall in, like Tony Abbott's been saying?
Well, actually, can I say about polls, they come and go, just like Labor leaders come and go, Kelvin.
And Liberal ones.
This poll has some really strong messages in it for the Labor Party. In particular, people don't like what Julia Gillard is doing and the way she's doing it. We had the breach of faith over the carbon tax. We had the mining tax, which is punitive. We've got the mistakes over the school halls programs and other wastes and mismanagement by this government. So it's no surprise to me that, Kelvin, with a 20% margin in his seat, the second safest Labor seat in the country, is happy because he'll be returned, he thinks, no matter what. But what about his fellow members in Greenway or Deakin or Corangamite or Latrobe and all those marginal Labor seat holders? I think they would be very scared here, and I think, Julia Gillard, has a case to answer. As for Tony Abbott, he's kept a united team. He's kept our messages focused that we oppose the carbon tax, that we will stop the boats, and that we have a whole suite of positive policies that he's announced on, whether it's on mental health or in other economic areas. So I think for our side, it's steady as she goes. There's no room for complacency, but surely there are some strong messages for the Labor Party.
Yeah, when we have seen Tony Abbott really focusing in on Labor MPs who have seats, who rely on the manufacturing industry, on mining, and saying, well, he's saying that they are feeling nervous about the carbon tax, calling on them to step up and speak out against it. Do you get a sense that there is that sort of nerves among them and that they're getting pressure from those sorts of industries in their electorates?
Well, look, Tony Abbott is no friend of manufacturing, and the Liberal Party has always served manufacturing poorly, so I don't think that kind of scare campaign will cut any grass in the relevant electorates. The Liberal Party proposes to cut government support for manufacturing. So
why is he being well received in the steel industry? Why is he being on the shop front?
There is no risk, in my view, that his message will be well received in manufacturing electorates who know perfectly well the record of the Liberal Party and previous Liberal governments in relation to support for those industries, which was not forthcoming and which saw unemployment rise higher than it needed to rise during the time. Yes, indeed, and in the here and now, we have been creating jobs in manufacturing, and employment in those electorates has been rising. So my colleagues, and I represent a manufacturing area myself, are very keen to support manufacturing industry, and the measures we are taking, including the measures in relation to carbon, will provide support for manufacturing.
And Tony Abbott did again today visit another business. He was focusing on steel beams today, the steel industry. There's been a lot of pressure on the government to make sure it looks after the steel industry in this carbon tax. But Tony Abbott's messages have all been very negative, as we know, but we've seen a number of reports in recent... Well, they're very negative on the carbon tax. I think that's a very fair point to make.
We oppose the carbon tax.
On the reports, though, we've seen in recent days. Yesterday, Julia Gillard came out with a number of fact sheets showing that Australia isn't going out on a limb, that our competitors, that our trading partners are also acting. Once the carbon tax comes in, and this goes back to my initial question, and the sky doesn't fall in, as Tony Abbott has been suggesting, do you then think that the Australian people will wonder why the coalition has been so negative
Well,
on
can I
it?
say a couple of things? Firstly, the Productivity Commission report, which was probably one of the ones you referred to not that long ago, said no other country in the world has a tax on emissions economy-wide. Australia is going down that path. We had Jenny George, the former president of the ACTU and the member for Throsby, speaking out today and saying that she joins Paul Howes and that the steel industry should be exempt from the carbon tax. So you should listen to Jenny George, and it's amazing she's now found a voice that since she's left Parliament. But why doesn't the current member for Throsby, Stephen Jones, also speak out on behalf of the industries in his electorate? So I think there is some nervousness on your side. Now, as you mentioned, the sky falling in, what is going to happen with the carbon tax is that energy prices are going to skyrocket and household bills will skyrocket. So it doesn't matter if the government pursues its redistributive policies with the Greens to give people compensation. The fact is, everyone is going to pay a higher price. And small businesses will not be compensated under your program, Kelvin. They will be punished. Households will be punished. And that's why people are starting to put that message through the polls.
To be fair to Jenny George, she was actually one of the most outspoken Labor MPs while she was in this place. And she's obviously now got a criticism, and she's one of many, as Josh says, lining up to slam this tax.
Josh is simply engaged in more scare campaign. The detail of the compensation package is not out there. So all these assertions about households being worse off, small business being worse off, and so on are absolutely baseless. The government is engaged in discussions with the steel industry, as with other industries, in terms of the design of the package. And so the scare campaign that the opposition is running is very unfortunate. This country needs to tackle the carbon problem. We need to reduce our carbon emissions, and it is a pity that the opposition seeks to engage in the scare campaign rather than being part of the solution, which they've always been invited to be.
Okay, well, I think you've both had your say on that. Let's move on to another issue, live exports. Kelvin, we know that you and Janelle Saffin drew up a motion that you wanted to put to caucus demanding the immediate cessation of live exports until Australian standards are met and the system is then monitored independently. Yesterday, caucus backed a motion requiring that these exports meet international standards, which apparently, as I understand, means that animals don't need to be stunned before they're killed. Is that a back down by people like you and Janelle, that the standards aren't as high as you wanted them to be?
On the contrary, it's a really good outcome. You can see that when we gave notice of motion, the government had moved to suspend exports to a dozen abattoirs, but we persisted with our motion because we were concerned that there may well be many more abattoirs in Indonesia which were also engaged in cruel practices in relation to animal welfare, and because we saw boats leaving Australian shores carrying live cattle for export to Indonesia where we could not be certain what would happen to them. Would they be treated in the same outrageous way that we'd seen cattle being treated on the Four Corners program? So we persisted with our motion. You saw the government make an announcement to suspend the live cattle export trade to Indonesia. That was a game-changing announcement. That suspension is now doing really good work, and I was pleased to be part of to be part of that motion, which has seen a great change where you now see a flurry of activity on the part of the Indonesian government, on the part of the industry, which I believe is a really good thing, which will lead to improved animal welfare standards. I think it is a great pity that the Liberal opposition is now running interference on this and saying we don't support the suspension that you have in place. It suggests to me that the Liberal Party does not have the commitment to animal welfare which we would expect and Australians would expect.
Can I just say they've made a real hash of this policy, right? Joe Ludwig knew about the footage from Four Corners for over a month and sat on his hands. What a disgrace that was, Kelvin. Then they've rushed out this immediate ban, which they're now backflipping from. The point is that I understand there are 7 Category A abattoirs in Indonesia and 18 Category B. What we're saying, and Tony Abbott's saying, is let's get those Category A abattoirs accredited quickly, and let's get the live animal export trade going straight away, so we can actually bring some certainty for the graziers and some certainty in terms of export income. But at the same time, we do not want to see animals mistreated at all, and what has been going on has been unacceptable. So with those other 18 abattoirs, let's bring them up to standards, use Australian know-how and experience and expertise. Let's make that happen, and let's make sure we have a sustainable but humane trade in live animals.
Indonesia certainly slammed this decision. They say they didn't get any consultation before this decision was made. The Indonesian Agriculture Minister is saying the decision was rushed. Isn't that point that Josh made about those 7 abattoirs that do meet certain standards, isn't it? Why won't you back those abattoirs being open for business right now?
Well, it's interesting that people were wanting to criticise the Agriculture Minister for being too slow, and now they're seeking to criticise him for being too hasty. So it's a bit difficult. It's a bit difficult to criticise the Agriculture Minister in relation to that. The truth is that the Australian public do not expect business as usual. They want change in relation to this. The suspension that has been put in place will drive change in relation to this, and will drive improved animal welfare standards. If we lift the suspension now, you can back it in that everyone will go back to sitting on their backsides, and sooner or later we'll have revelations of precisely the horrendous treatment of cattle that we saw a couple of weeks ago. What we need to put in place are proper standards of animal welfare, which mean that we have stunning, which mean that we have tracking, so we can be sure what happens to individual cattle when they leave Australian shores, and which mean that we have independent monitoring. From my point of view, I think the industry should think seriously about having someone from the RSPCA or Animals Australia sitting in those abattoirs with a video camera, so we all know exactly what is going on.
Can I just say, you make a very good point about Himalaya. You make a very good point about Indonesia. And just to say, where is our foreign minister in all this? He seems to be allergic to the region, Kevin Rudd.
Josh, don't you need to look at the industry as well? Do you think that they need to step up with perhaps compensation? The government did warn the industry back in January, and then I think it was again in March, asking them to come up with an alternative plan that would safeguard animals that are sent over there for slaughter. Do you think the industry should step up as well?
I actually think, I understand that the industry is in consultations with the government, so I think, work does need to be done in this area, but it needs to be done in consultation, and we don't want business as usual, to be honest, Kelvin. We don't want business as usual because, the images that were seen on Four Corners were absolutely horrific. But what I'm saying is your knee-jerk reactions have brought great uncertainty to the graziers, to the public, to our exporters, and I just want to leave on the Foreign Minister. He has a responsibility for our bilateral relationship, and on this key issue, he's gone missing.
This is not a knee-jerk reaction. This is a response to Australian public opinion and to the unconscionable footage that we saw. Okay. And so you should not be running interference on it.
Both of you need to run off to question time. So thank you for coming on, Josh Frydenberg and Kelvin Thomson. Appreciate both of your insights. We'll let you go off to that. We are going to take you now live to the House of Representatives, where question time is about to get underway.
Leader of the opposition.